I'm Michael Boyd. I'm the MD of the International Trade Institute, and I'd like to welcome everybody very warmly to today's webinar. The Institute is devoted to the education of people in the subject of international trade, and we run a diploma program in international trade compliance currently underway. We also run monthly webinars on topics of interest, and today's subject is about the impacts of the energy crisis on international trade, which I think is close to many people's hearts or minds at the moment. I will introduce the speakers in a moment. We're delighted we have such a distinguished panel, and I'd just like to tell you a couple of housekeeping matters. So we're on Zoom, which is familiar to you all. Our plan is to go for about 45 minutes, less if appropriate. We've asked each of our four speakers to talk for 7 minutes approximately each, and we have a facility for questions and answers, or you can raise your hand if you want to speak at any time. And we encourage participation by those of you who have kindly come today. So our first speaker will be Luke O'Callaghan-White. He's the joint author of a very recent paper published 2 weeks ago with the encouraging and optimistic title of Europe's Long Winter, Escaping the Energy Crisis, which was published by the Institute of International and European Affairs in Dublin, from where Luke will speak. He'll be followed by Rodney Kernaghan, who's a long-standing client of our sister company Trade Advisors. He's the financial controller at APC Regal Processors in County Armagh, an international firm processing animal byproducts and operating in Europe and the United States. We expect to have with us Seamus Leahy, the Northern Ireland Policy Manager of Logistics UK. He's a very high profile, probably known to many of you as a commentator on shipping, transport and energy matters. And finally, Tony Heffernan, who's with us from Dingle, County Kerry. He's head of operations at Pardus Energy. He's an expert in the development, design and operation management of LNG import, redistribution and export projects and associated natural gas facilities globally. We'll go search for Seamus, and we'll hopefully have him to join us. We're having the speakers in this order, so Seamus would be third in line. So Luke is going to set the scene based on the paper that he produced, and he's going to use a few slides, as will one or two of the other speakers. Luke, it's all yours, and thank you and the other speakers for gracing this occasion. We're delighted that you've all come, and we look forward very much to what you have to tell us.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you to the International Trade Institute for the invitation. Great to be with you this morning. Just might give me a nod. You can see the screen here.
Yeah,
great.
That's fine.
So, as Michael mentioned, I'm the senior researcher here at the Institute of International and European Affairs. I'm just going to do 3 things in the next 7 minutes or so. I'd like to provide maybe a brief outline of how we got to where we are in terms of energy prices, perhaps touch on some of the policy approaches to stabilize prices over the short and medium term, and to conclude with perhaps a couple of comments on what this winter ahead might look like. So I think it's important, though, to begin with some context and to set the scene, so to speak. It's important to recognize that the current energy crisis in Europe is really a gas crisis. And so gas comprises, as you'll know, 24% of energy consumption in the EU, and approximately 40% of this comes from Russian imports. And so we're dealing in large part with the consequences of this over-reliance on one source for the price hikes that we've seen over the last several months. And while, of course, Ireland does not depend on Russian gas for its energy, the tightening of supply and the increase in prices in Europe will have an increase in prices here in Ireland. So we do know that the increase in energy prices is the primary driver of inflation in the Eurozone right now. And while lots of commentary highlights that the Russian invasion and the specter of war in late 2021 is responsible for the steep increase in the spike of prices, this volatility actually predates the conflict in Ukraine. So in this slide, I'm showing the annual rate of change of energy prices in the euro area over the last 5 years. And there have been significant fluctuations since 2020. And the little red mark at the bottom here, it indicates the nadir of energy prices that was reached in April of 2020. And the primary volatility here is due to COVID-19 and the imposition of restrictions. But if you follow the graph to the right, you'll see blue indicates energy as a whole. From the period of early 2021 to present, this has been marked by quite resurgent demand and quicker than expected economic recovery. And from that period of early 2021 to present, the Eurozone has been in near continuous energy price inflation. And there are a number of factors for this. So yes, the Russian invasion had a major impact on international markets, of course. There was supply reduction that I'll touch on in just a moment. There was also a very tight LNG market with 20% fewer shipments arriving in Europe in 2021 compared with 2020. Other natural factors, we had a particularly cold winter, which led to an increase in gas demand. And then there was a very unusual phenomenon of a wind drought last year as well. But we can't overstate the impact of the Russian war in Ukraine on the energy price hikes that we're seeing in our bills at the minute here in Ireland. And so since Q3 2021, there has been significant undersupply of gas to Europe. And from the date of the Russian invasion in Ukraine on the 24th of February, international markets were really thrown into turmoil by this conflict. And over the last several months, we've seen the weaponization of energy in the EU. We've seen the reduction and the elimination of gas supplies from Russia to certain member states. There's a significant reduction in the flow of pipelines from Russia to Europe. If we look at Nord Stream 1, for example, a significant, quite astonishing undersupply, even in the context of the last several months. That's led to an increase in gas prices of around 30% over the last few days. And so the EU's response has been, I suppose, earmarked by the Repower EU plan, which is its agenda and framework to divest from fossil fuel imports from Russia before 2030. And we've seen sanctions on many energy products, and there's a partial embargo on oil. But we are in a bind, and I'll come back to this in a moment. The bind is going to affect Ireland. Because of the EU's over-reliance on Russia as an energy source, we need to wean off from this source, but the power of weaning off is very much in the hands of Russia. So we might see some quite sudden disruptions in the supply of gas to Europe, which we are already seeing. So in a sense, if that's kind of outlined where we are, what have policymakers been doing? On the left-hand side here, I'll just briefly touch on the major points with which we're all familiar. You know, across the EU, we've seen a range of different fiscal policy measures introduced to primarily shelter consumers from the cost of living crisis. It's important to note, though, that there will be political pressure to maintain and surely increase these supports over the coming months. But there is always the risk that with further government fiscal stimulus could lead to demand-led inflation, which would place an even greater onus on central banks to act more aggressively. And of course, taking effect from today, the ECB has raised interest rates for the first time in 11 years. Fundamentally, though, these monetary and fiscal policy responses, be they in Ireland, be they across the EU, be they directed by the Commission, they're not going to address the structural elements of the energy sector, which facilitate these quite volatile prices that we've seen in recent months. And on the right-hand side here, I've included the cover of the recent paper to which Michael alluded, that is co-authored with my colleague Darragh Lawler, an economist here at the Institute, Europe's Long Winter, Escaping the Energy Crisis. And we note that the preponderance of literature at the minute is focused very much on short-term measures, and we argue that we need a more long-term approach to address the core causes of energy price inflation in the Eurozone. So I'll briefly touch on those, and there are three that we indicate. Firstly, it's critical that there is a joint procurement of gas. To import gas as a single actor would be far more beneficial to every member state than the current approach that's taken at the minute. Yes, it's very welcome that there is a purchasing platform that the EU has put in place where member states can work together to procure gas, but we argue it should go much further than this. And we show that with joint procurement, we would lower prices and enhance Europe's security of supply. Gas is always difficult. Member states have different requirements, different capacities to import and so forth. So we will be relying on this sense of solidarity, but it's also strategy. As I said, very tight international market conditions. The EU acting as a single entity would be a much stronger actor. And if we could follow an approach, much like we saw with the procurement of vaccines, we could purchase more gas for less. I'll touch on it very briefly. A reform of the EU wholesale electricity market is clearly needed. It's very technical. Happy to get into that in more detail in the conversation or Q&A period. But it's simply untenable to continue with the price of electricity at the wholesale level set by the price of gas. It's not fit for 2030, and it's the primary reason that we're seeing this surge in electricity prices for consumers. Furthermore, it's something to look, perhaps not for Ireland, at the question of better locational signals. And thirdly, it's particularly germane for Irish policymakers and planners here, is that we need much better electricity grid interconnection. At the moment, we have no electricity connection with the EU. The Celtic Interconnector will come on stream later this decade, but we do need another one as well. So it's time to start thinking about a second electricity interconnector. And then just to conclude by looking at winter later this year, I think it's inevitable we will face a very difficult period over the coming months. The year ahead markets yesterday in France and Germany are at record prices. This indicates that traders expect things to significantly deteriorate. The question is, how much disruption are we going to face? And part of that depends on how cold it is and the extent to which we face supply interruption. If we're unable to fill gas storage levels, this has a direct knock-on effect for next year. It will be even harder to fill, so there's a knock-on effect here. The Commission's proposal, Save Gas for a Safe Winter, a 15% reduction. Ireland has a derogation here, an exemption on a couple of grounds, but it's primarily a signal to Europeans that we need to take this far more seriously. Happy to touch on this again in the Q&A. But the final 2 points I'd just like to finish on here is that climate action and the acceleration of the energy transition really goes hand in hand with greater energy security, both in Ireland and across the EU. And I think if we continue on the path that we are in at the minute, that Ireland risks losing its potential competitive advantage in the wind economy as other member states around us begin to ratchet up their capacities in the wind sector. And then from that, we can see the loss of potential when it comes to green hydrogen. So I will leave it at that, just to say thank you again, Michael and your colleagues, for the invitation. Look forward to the other panelists' discussion and addressing questions in due course. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Luke, and well done. We go straight to Rodney, who's going to speak from a more micro perspective in terms of the impacts of these factors on his enterprise in Northern Ireland. Rodney, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you once again for your invitation to today's webinar. I think scene was set very well there by Luke, with a lot of the points very relevant to what's happening on the ground today. And that's really what I'm looking to do here from a business perspective, just highlight how those factors are having an impact on business. Regal Processors itself, we've been in business for 27 years now. We were incorporated back in '95 under an existing platform, which is one of US ownership. So we're part of a global platform. Our global headquarters are in Iowa in the United States, and we've got European headquarters in Spain. So we are a satellite manufacturer for our global brand. We are a substantial energy user. The manufacture of functional proteins for the animal feed sector is essentially one of spray drying. So we're taking a liquid and we're spray drying it into a very fine powder form. Gas and electricity accounts for, at the moment, and I say at the moment, pushing on towards 30% of our total cost of production. But as we look ahead to 2023 and beyond, that's dependence on energy as a cost will continue to rise. I was thinking, and again looking at Luke's presentation, he highlighted when we started to see this rise in prices occur. I think in 2021, probably towards the winter time, domestic customers were being warned of an increase in the price of a fill of oil for their homes. They were being told that their electricity bills were going to start to rise, and there would be continued increases moving into 2022, and we've already seen a lot of those. But that come from a base in 2020 where we really are at record lows. So I'm going to show a slide here, and again, I'm conscious that Luke did show a slide which showed the rate change of energy. My slide is going to show the actual cost of these prices. Hopefully you can see this on the screen. Is that clear?
Yeah, you might just explain the main elements here.
Okay. So we've got half a dozen lines on this chart. There's 6 years information and data shown here. On the left-hand side, we have the commodity price. And when we look at gas and when we look at electricity, it's this commodity price which is driving gas and electricity prices. Electricity, you also have a carbon impact on the price of that, but over the last couple of years, again, it has doubled and risen significantly. Basically, if we look at the months across the bottom, normally the trend in the past number of years has been that summer prices for gas and electricity trend much lower, and then towards the end of the year, the fourth quarter, October, November, December, and into January, February, March, we start to see rises. But if you look at this chart, the years 2017, 2018, 2019, everything was effectively very, very flat. Everything was within a decent enough range and something that companies could manage. And typically what industry is doing is contracting in annually, say for 2 years even, for gas and electricity, and any spikes, fluctuations or whatever are absorbed within that contract process. But during the pandemic in 2020, industry had shut down and the demand for gas had fallen significantly, and this resulted in the orange line here, if you can see it, which is record lows, really, really record lows. And if you look at the chart on the left, the prices were in high teens, and comparing to where they were typically around 50 pence, we were seeing prices as low as 16, 17, 18 pence, 20 pence, half of where they normally would be. That's not the total cost to an industry. They also have pass-through charges. We live on an island. There are storage prices, there are transmission prices, there are an element of fixed prices involved as well. But undoubtedly, we did enjoy low prices at the time. Then again, as Luke had highlighted in his chart, we came into April 2020 and we started to see the world opening up again. We started to see business becoming very active. We started to see a huge demand, particularly coming from the Far East, and the impact that was starting to have on the market. And this is where, if you look at the blue line, we can see these rises starting to come through. This again, as I say, is all historical data. Where the projections were at the time were not necessarily showing as high a position at this, but they were showing a lot of increases. And industry was starting to get nervous. High energy users were starting to get nervous by these rises because they were unprecedented. They hadn't been there for the last 4 years. And generally people were unlikely and not particularly willing to start to take positions on gas and on energy. Now, looking back in hindsight, it would have been almost the right thing to do, because where we grew to at the end of 2021, where we are now in 2022, you can see typically these prices are averaging out around 4-5 times of where historical averages were. So industry was faced with taking some opportunistic spots, but generally very dependent on what was going on within the commodity market. So again, as Luke highlighted, this was prior even to the Russian conflict, the Russian-Ukraine conflict. That kicks in here around this period of time in March, February, March this year, 2022, and we've seen again unprecedented spikes in the marketplace. And although there's been some easing of that, it's starting to ramp up again as we approach winter. Europe is going to look at trying to store as much gas as they possibly can. But 2 days ago, Russia announced that they were going to cut the supply from the Nord 1 line coming into Europe, with the idea of hitting Europe hard as they start to build up for winter storage. And that, of course, has a further impact on the price. So the tap was switched back down again, and now we're only getting 20%, or Europe is only getting 20% of its gas from the Nord 1 line. This is, you have a playoff situation now where other countries are looking to react to this. As I say, the strategy that Luke highlighted is one of removing our dependence on gas from Russia. So some of the alternatives that have been happening is the arrival of LNG into Europe, coming from America, where they have been seeing some record low prices of gas over the last number of years. Also coming from Canada, Japan, even Africa is starting to increase production as well. But the other question that industry has now, as we react to what's happening and hope for some easing, albeit temporarily, is that the concern around how much availability there's going to be. That hasn't been something that's been to the fore before, but it's something now as we look at shortages. Luke highlighted the ease off approach across Europe and where there have to potentially be some form of rationing. But companies are now looking at, well, how do we keep going in business? We deal with a perishable product. We're not in a situation where we can just cut back on production and say we'll go down to a 3-day a week and wait till things become better. We're having to produce and manufacture on a daily basis, 24/6, and keep producing and putting product into storage. So, you know, the short-term relief quite simply isn't there. I think we're very much at the hand of legislation. I think we're very much at the hand of policy. I think we're very much at the hand of environmental approach. And again, a lot of the solutions that Luke was highlighting are going to take time. If you look at this chart again, and basically it's all historical, but if we look at what's projected, Luke touched on 2023, we're not going to see a lot of relief. In fact, 2023 shows average prices in around 350, 360. So where they are now here, that's what we're expected to see for 2023. The projection for 2024 is easing. That's somewhere around 240. And into 2025, the commodity price is down into somewhere around 140, 150. But that's not short-term relief for companies. and it's a difficulty that we're really faced with. Our price, just to put something into perspective, our gas price since 2020 has more than doubled. It's about 110% increase. Electricity, we were fortunate enough to have contracted when prices were low, but we're now, like so many organisations, coming up and faced with prices which are 4 times almost as high of where they had been. Something additional, we're talking here about direct gas, direct electricity, but there's also, and I know one of our other speakers is going to talk about transportation. Transportation is about 20% of our cost, and how we bring the raw material to the back door here. There's been obviously fuel scale charges. We know at the petrol pumps, or petrol and diesel are at all-time highs, and we've got a lot of transport companies now who are passing on this cost again to industry. So we're really squeezed at the moment. It's a really difficult time. Relief, there's nothing in the short term. We have to try and manage the situation as best as we can. We have to look at making sure our business can continue, and to that extent, as I say, looking for an alternative or a substitute to natural gas is something that has to be considered. So when we're looking, and some of our other plants throughout Europe are looking at LPG and having bulk tank storage on their actual sites. It's not a cost saver, it's just making sure that we keep in business. Okay, so again, if there's any questions to follow out of that at the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to take them.
Okay, Rodney, well done. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive, not a pretty picture. We wish you good luck in survival. But thank you very much for outlining how it's affecting your business. Now, Seamus Lenny is here. We introduced him earlier. Seamus, we're delighted to have you. Your field is the transport field, as mentioned by Rodney, and you're well known to many in our audience, and we're honoured to have you with us. So we look forward to hearing from you now.
All right, thanks very much, Michael. Really good to be chatting to you all this morning. Yeah, so I work for Logistics UK. We're a UK-wide organisation. We have 18,000 members across the UK, and our sister association in Ireland is the Freight Transport Association of Ireland as well. So we're across the UK and Ireland with our presence. I'll keep this, Michael, relatively brief. I think really Luke and Rodney really have covered obviously the hows and the whys of the impacts of the energy crisis. So I'll just break it into the 3 areas of transport. Our membership comprises road, air and sea operators. So I'll touch on road first of all about the impacts. So since January of this year compared to July of this year, so in the space of 6 months on diesel, road operators, hauliers are obviously constrained on the energy they can do. It's not a case of going and looking at the different options. We're limited really to technology at the moment. So on diesel, smaller hauliers and van operators, they would use fuel cards for purchasing their diesel. They've seen a 31% increase on their diesel costs. The larger operators who would then get diesel delivered into their yards to be bunkered, where it's delivered in-house, they've seen their increase go up by 26%, so a saving of 5% if they were using a fuel card. But only obviously the bigger guys can avail of that. So what we're looking at really, there's behind the diesel costs, I suppose, what's impacted on the road industry. Well, there's obviously the supply and capacity disruptions. There's less drivers in the market. There's a shortage in the UK of around about 60,000 HGV drivers. A lot of that being driven with the inability to employ EU nationals now because of Brexit immigration rules. Obviously the inflationary costs of fuel on top of that, and then obviously the issue with Ukraine as well has had an impact. And what we're seeing with some operators are trying to get away from the diesel addiction. Now, when I talk about the diesel addiction, obviously we use diesel primarily for the movement of goods. There is a lot of transport companies are trying to move maybe to gas or to electric. Now, hydrogen's further in the future. I'll touch on that very briefly. But really, electric, there's a lot of operators are wanting to use electric for vans. Now, electric is only possible up to a 26-ton truck. So the type of lorries you'd see in the city centre, a rigid lorry delivering ice cream to a shop or something, that's about as high as electric can power a vehicle at the moment. So we're seeing vans, you'd see the Amazon vans and things like that going around. They're pretty much primarily electric now. Unfortunately, the impact, the demand on the courier industry and the move to electric vehicles, and also because of the Ukraine crisis, has impacted the semiconductors. So the compounds, the minerals that are used to manufacture those. We've now seen a waiting list for new vans in the UK and Ireland increased to about 1.5 years. So it used to be you could go to Renault, Mercedes, get your van and get it maybe a couple of weeks later. Now it's 1.5 years wait time for that. So that's an obstacle for people who are trying to move away from fossil fuels and embrace electric. It's the time it takes to do that. What we're seeing as well, basically, the fuel cost increase. Obviously, it's made a case, obviously, for that change to greener vehicles, and also the greener operating models. So we're seeing a lot more companies now, people who are purchasing, like Rodney, who are purchasing transport. People are now starting to use IT systems for greater fleet utilization to avail of empty loads. So if you imagine, there's a lot of systems coming on the market now. It's almost like an Uber for freight. So it used to be once upon a time, you would call up a haulier and they would drive a truck maybe empty 20 miles to your site and then pick up the load and take it to London or whatever. There's now IT systems in place where there might be a lorry tipping 5 miles down the road, and rather than it empty running, it can come to your premises and at a reduced haulage rate, they can then carry the goods for you. So that's really the future where the haulage industry is going. There'll be a lot more utilization of apps like that there to just avail of, to reduce that empty running, because the haulage industry is no different to an airline. You wouldn't fly an airplane empty from between London and Dublin. It makes no sense. So why have we historically done it with lorries between towns and cities? Briefly then on to the technology, then the hydrogen aspect. Hydrogen is probably the long-term goal for haulage. We're seeing here in Belfast, for example, TransLink now are operating about 12 buses that are hydrogen powered. I think that's something really in the UK and Ireland, hydrogen we can avail of, because there's a difference. Hydrogen, you can either get it from a green source or a black source. So the black source would be you're making the hydrogen from fossil fuel power stations. What the scheme we're doing in Northern Ireland at the moment with TransLink is evolving up is they've got wind farms in North County Antrim. The wind farms then generate the power that then make the hydrogen. Hydrogen, basically, all you need, the key ingredient is electricity and water, and then you create the hydrogen. That's a scheme that's progressing pretty well here in Belfast. We should hopefully see that rolled out to more public transport in the UK and Ireland in the years ahead, but also haulage will be tapping into that market as well. On the sea side of things, there's one thing we have seen is that there's a huge increase on shipping rates in the last 1.5 years. A lot of that's been down to fuel, a lot of it been down to COVID and capacity from the Far East. What we've now seen is a lot of people, more goods are being stored than shipped. So people will ship goods in bulk now to avail of cheaper shipping rates and then store those goods, because the comparison of storage costs versus shipping costs, generally a lot of businesses are finding it's cheaper to store the goods and bring them in rather than shipping multiple loads. And the problem we have with the shipping companies, the huge cost and fuel for them, is that they have reduced capacity from the Far East coming into Europe. So once upon a time, we used to have 21 shipping lines, global shipping lines. And I'm old enough, like 15 years ago, I worked in the shipping industry and you couldn't name all the shipping companies that you could avail of. Now, today, we've got 7 global shipping companies. And their key thing, even with their buying power, they can't get around the fuel costs on that. So what they're doing is that they've reduced capacity of ships coming from the Far East into Europe because of fuel costs. But what that has meant then is an increased demand of those ships coming in, so higher shipping costs. So what we're looking at now, and probably maybe Rodney or other people on the call might know, historically, you might have been able to ship a container from China into Dublin or Belfast for $3,000. Today, you're probably looking more about $11,000 or $12,000. A lot of that is down to the fuel and then the impact then on capacity. Ports are also impacted by this. The terminals, both Dublin, Belfast, Cork, but primarily the Rotterdam and the Antwerps of this world where the containers are transshipped, they've now imposed energy surcharges. So for every container transshipped in those ports, you're probably looking at a surcharge between 20 and 30 euros a container. And then lastly, on the ferry side of things, with shipping across the Irish Sea, when I speak to a lot of hauliers, there was a fuel surcharge on trailers, whether they're accompanied or not, going across the Irish Sea. In January of this year, that fuel surcharge was around about £25 a trailer. In June of this year, it was £137. So again, you can see the impact that fuel has had on shipping here. It's just a constant pile-on of costs for operators here. And then very briefly, air freight's the one good news story. We have seen air freight rates are now starting to reduce a little, even with the huge cost of aviation fuel. What has redeemed us in that has been the lifting of COVID restrictions. During COVID, there was less passenger aircraft, so we're relying primarily on cargo aircraft to carry the goods. But since now we've got passenger aircraft in the air, the capacity, the belly hold, those passenger aircraft take a lot of air freight now. So we've got that back online. So thankfully, fuel costs have been matched with the increased availability of demand in the market. So that's really where we are. With that, we're really at the mercy of technology, Michael, going forward in the transport sector. Thank you.
Sorry, well done, Seamus. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive in record time. But a lot to absorb there. So our final speaker is Tony Heffernan. We introduced Tony earlier. Tony, you're in a fairly specialist niche area. Just tell us about what you're up to and what you're seeing and how you think the future is going to go.
So firstly, thanks for having me on here. I have a few slides. I'll put them up shortly. I'm in the LNG business, and I appreciate everyone here is feeling the pinch a lot more than ourselves in the LNG business. But I'd like to complement the previous speakers and then supplement some factual situations. So let me just throw the slides up and see where we go. So just a little introduction about myself. I work for Paradise Energy. It's a privately held company, and we own and operate LNG import and natural gas export facilities. I've been at this now for over 30 years in LPG and LNG and associated shore and floating infrastructure. So this is the journey so far, folks, and everyone will recognize this. We're all talking about how do we come to this point. It's simple. It's down to policy and government strength, and also the vulnerabilities, not just in Europe, but also predominantly in Ireland. Let's focus on the Irish market. We failed to prepare. In 2008, I was asked to come back to Ireland to assist with the development of an LNG import facility in Kerry, which never got off the ground. We got planning permission, and then the resistance happened. So the government and the policymakers at the time, they didn't see any foresight about how vulnerable Ireland is. Things happen. You know, this happens in every business area, please. There's lobbyists and other people pushing, but we are so vulnerable in Ireland and Europe now for energy security. So how do we get out of it? In my eyes, we have to just come to terms and draw a line. There's no short-term fix. It's going to take us a considerable amount of time to get out of it, but it can be done, and it can be fast-tracked quite quickly. But we have to appreciate the risks and remember that done is better than perfect.
Tony, sorry to interrupt. Did you want to share your screen, Tony? Do you have slides? Some slides there?
Yes, sorry. Oh, it's not. Sorry, it's not sharing, is it? Pardon me.
No problem.
Sorry, no. Technology has failed me today.
Emer.
Oh, sorry. I have it here now again. Sorry.
Yeah, good man.
It's just looking for the right screen. Okay, I'll just jump straight into this one. Can you see this now? Not yet?
Not seeing it yet. It usually takes a few seconds to load. You have the share screen control there. Yeah.
I have, yes, yeah. I'll just press the green button. Sorry now. Not very professional, is it?
No, don't worry. Even Homer nods.
Not the word. I have too many screens there. I've got 5 screens. Let's just continue. I'll put up an LNG value chain there in a minute. Yeah. Oh, I have it. Pardon me. Here it is.
We're intrigued by what you have on your 5 screens. So go
sorry, it's one of those things. I work in different continents all the time, so I have so much open. This is not ideal, but hopefully you'll get to see it here. Just ignore my I would say incompetence at the moment.
No problem.
So the LNG value chain is where we need to go. Hydrogen will be a solution in the future, but it is decades away to have a feasible amount of energy available to fulfill the needs of the transport industries and society in general. There's only one vessel in the world that has ever transported hydrogen between Japan and Australia recently. Japan received it from Australia, and it was a very, very small volume of energy that was actually delivered. So the only way we're going to get out of this is to embrace the technologies that are readily available. And the biggest one is natural gas. Natural gas, we are vulnerable by pipelines throughout Europe from Russia. So we have to look at getting LNG into Ireland, into Europe. And we have seen this now with 4 FSRU facilities being sanctioned for Germany. They'll take about 1.5 to 2 years to get fully developed. But also we've had it throughout Europe for years where other countries have been building up. We've had resistance in Ireland to this, but since we have no volume of offshore gas, only Corrib, which is depleting, and there's no more licensing to bring our own natural gas ashore, we have to look to LNG. So anyone in logistics, I would say the only feasible way of satisfying emissions and the environmental crisis with the energy crisis is to switch to natural gas and LNG in the interim. Hydrogen will have a space, and I welcome that, but when governments don't embrace nuclear power and LNG, then we're left vulnerable. So this picture here, the value chain, shows exactly the flexibility of LNG. 60% of all new ships, which transport all your trucks, and 85% of the global trade is shipped on vessels. 60% of all new buildings are going to be LNG powered. This is a fact out of Korea, out of Japan, China, everywhere which build the big ships, which I've been involved in now for 30 years. From here, you can transport LNG by road, you can create depots, and you can also facilitate natural gas for homes, CNG for fuels, for some of the buses and other stuff. But the biggest obstacle to this is time. Time is a huge element, and with that we have to develop the competencies, resources, and we are absolutely under the thumb of the policymakers in Europe when it comes to developing projects, because there's so much legislation. So regulatory and statutory, I'm just going to focus on this. If the industry and the governments, which is happening in Europe, and Luke made a very valid point, Europe are now going as a single unit to the market to develop LNG import on bulk from America and everywhere else where they can get it. But there's only X amount of LNG available. You cannot build an LNG production facility in less than 3 years. But they are under development, and we have to get over the fact about the shale gas plants and everything. If we want to keep the lights on, we have to just accept that where we can get our security of supply to develop the industries and sustain industries in Ireland, because we're more vulnerable as an island, We have to just change our mindset and embrace it. And that includes the policymakers. And I'll give you a quick example of what's possible. This is our facility in Turkey. We built it in 2016. From the financial decision gate to invest, the FID, it took us 6.5 months to build the facility. And this facility then receives gas on a weekly basis by ship. So this here on top is our FSRU. It's a floating storage regasification vessel. And these are some of the LNG vessels which bring gas to us every week. So we have the ability to keep the lights on in Turkey for over 15% of the entire country's requirements. That's industry, rollage, heavy industry, and obviously heating and domestic use. It's a very, very quick fix overall for the industry to get. Now, to build a new FSRU will take you at least 18 months to do, but we have to look at the way forward. And just to give you some statistics of what an FSRU is capable of, because building a shore LNG terminal for storage would take about 3 to 4 years minimum. I built one in the UK in Milford Haven years ago. So it takes a very, very long time, and it costs about 4 times as much. And we have to think of the bottom line for everyone here, business and the population. But our vessel here, we can send out 1 billion cubic feet of gas a day. So just to give you the capacity, we have to look at diversifying to something like this. And finally, I would just say that, you know, with the haulage, the whole network of fueling the vehicles of present and the future needs to be supported with LNG. Across Europe, they are building LNG truck and rail distribution refueling stations at an enormous rate. In Ireland, we're bringing LNG into the country on ferries on the back of trailers. That's what we're doing, and we're bringing in about maybe four units a month. So there's only like Cadbury and our Mondelez in Kerry. There's a facility in Galway, and they're using small volume in LNG. And as Seamus said, the LNG and natural gas, before we have hydrogen, is the only way of really moving heavy goods vehicles and keeping the country going. So with that, I'll shut up, really. Sorry, I'm a bit thrown with my slides. But the biggest thing is that if we want to develop Ireland as a secure place to invest and to nurture our industries, we have to diversify very quickly, and we have to influence the policymakers to embrace LNG as a short-term fix, because they're not embracing nuclear, they're not embracing other energy sources, and this is the only way out of it. So thank you. I would be happy to be connect with anyone further after this, and we'll take some Q&A.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Tony. That's very, very, very interesting. And as have been the previous 3 speakers. Now we're slightly over our time. If there are questions or comments, we'd be happy to take them now. And if you'll indulge us for this delay. Some of our speakers may want to make some further comments on what they have also heard. So would any of our participants like to raise their hand to speak or use the Q&A function? Seamus, your hand is up. Happy to hear from you.
Michael, I'd endorse there with what Tony said. Gas definitely has a part to play, certainly in commercial vehicles. In lieu, really, you know, I think the scale of hydrogen, really, hydrogen's nice, almost. Partly, it's almost like it's a trial at the moment, and it's a mixed bag. It's like electric. It's almost like a PR exercise for some corporations as well to show the green credentials. But I know there's some haulage operators are operating on gas at the moment. Question for Tony as well. Could we supplement LNG? I know there's a few operators. I know there's one large haulier based in Calvin is running on biomethane gas that's taken from the farming industry. Could that help supplement obviously the LNG market have a mixture of the different types of gases?
Yes, gas is gas, methane is methane. But we have to underline the basic cost of utilizing that product, biomethane. If you want to convert that into something to ship around the country in trucks to other CNG facilities, you have to compress it to very high pressures. And then the volume of CNG that you put in the back of a trailer is quite limited, actually. That's where LNG comes in. LNG, you freeze it down basically to minus 160 degrees. And then you can ship over 600 times the volume per cubic meter. So 600 times the energy is transferred by road then in LNG. The biomethane, speaking to my colleagues in Gas Networks Ireland and across Europe, will facilitate up to about 3 to 5% of the NG demand. And the cost of using biomethane for transport is going to be exponential unless you own the facilities yourselves and you're willing to invest. Because the cost of compressing it, it would be better if every farm that could produce biomethane could just inject directly into the national grid. That then from source to distribution is the shortest distance possible. Because in our country, we charge for moving a molecule of gas per mile or per kilometer in the gas network. That's under the regulations, the CRU. So when you put a cubic meter of gas into the system in Cork, for example, if you wanted to put it there and you wanted to take it out in Dublin, then there's tariffs implied by Gas Networks Ireland. So we have to get out of that market that we charge everyone for everything. You know, we have to look holistically about this now as a government state emergency, not just in Ireland, but across Europe.
Okay, fine. Thank you both, gentlemen. Now, Stephanie Malone from Cardiff-Skeith, is a local enterprise quite close to us here in North Meath. Stephanie, we can give you the floor to hear your comment or your question. I think you may have to unmute first of all, and we'd be happy to see you if you're not too shy.
Hello, hi. I suppose, looking at the industry in general, it's sourcing our trucks and our machinery is where we're finding the difficulty. I know you alluded on the vans, Seamus, in terms of the 1.5 year wait on vans, but do you see that the truck industry also continuing to have that delay of supply for over 1.5 years, or do you think is it going to be resolved sooner?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same problem really for the heavier trucks. What we're seeing is that the value of second-hand trucks, the value of some second-hand trucks are nearly the same as new trucks. That's how desperate some companies, I'm sure you've seen that in the market when you've gone out to price to try and buy something more immediate. But I know from speaking to likes of Mercedes and Volvo, and you know, the semiconductor issue has been big across the market, and it's affecting the car industry as well. And then we've also got then from 2030 new diesel vehicles obviously no longer being sold, and that's going to affect really in the heavier industry. What we're saying to government here is that we need a sensible phase out date for commercial vehicles for being phased out, because we can't phase out diesel trucks until we have viable alternatives, whether, you know, such as gas and electric for the lighter vehicles. So I know that there is a net zero target for those for 2050. The world, no heavy trucks will be running on fossil fuels. I would imagine basically, I think I've dealt with the Scottish government. The Scottish government are probably the most proactive government in the UK and Ireland when it comes to green technology. Because I find when I work with the Scottish government, they do not look to Westminster or Brussels for, I suppose, their policy. They look more to the Nordic countries, to Sweden, Denmark, etc. And they are looking at the Scots really want to embrace the gas, the hydrogen a lot sooner than the rest of the UK. So I think the problem will persist for a while for diesel because that clamour for second hand and for new trucks is still there, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, fine, Stephanie. Thank you for your question. We have a Q&A here from Ed Lynch. Ed, nice to hear from you. Tony spoke a lot about Ireland and what the government should do. What would he advise the European governments and the Commission to do? And what's his outlook for the next couple of winters for gas supply in Europe as a whole? So, Tony.
Okay. What I would advise, I think, Europe has already started to do it, is to diversify the security of supply. The biggest problem we have, and Luke highlighted that European governments are working together now as one to try and bulk buy LNG so that no country is left vulnerable. However, we have to enter long-term purchase agreements. You know, that is the biggest defining market control that we could possibly have. So like what they do in JERA and Japan and Korea, they buy gas for 10 and 20 years with the supply contracts. And that gives you a fixed base price. And that's why everything has been quite volatile in the last 2 years. So to avoid volatility, you purchase on bulk and then you have security of supply. So everything has to come back to trading. So the traders need to be put under control of government, and government needs to step in to just purchase the raw material themselves. And I just want to touch on one other thing that Seamus just mentioned there about all the electric domestic vehicles and vans or small commercial vehicles. You know, Ireland and Europe have a big problem with renewable energy. They believe that it's always available, and policymakers throughout Europe and Ireland are pushing renewables, which is correct. But only last year or earlier this year did the Irish government and some of the European governments come to the conclusion that they can't survive without gas. And if you want electric vehicles, you have to generate electricity. And gas is the only way when renewables aren't operating. So that's why we're investing in 2,000 megawatts of gas energy development and new power stations in Ireland alone. So that's the way forward.
Okay, Tony, well done. Thank you very much. Do we have any other Q&A or raised hands? I think not. We're well beyond our time and we should stick to it, but I think this has been a very, very interesting set of presentations and also a couple of very good questions from our two contributors. So thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Ed. On your behalf, may I thank especially our kind speakers who spoke with great expertise, experience, clear analysis of a highly complex situation. And please stay in touch with us and our institute, and we look forward to having you at next month's webinar. So we'll say goodbye now. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for all of you for kindly being with us this morning.
Thank you.